Thanks, everybody. My name's Aaron Jeskey. I'm a principal cloud architect at PTP, and that just means that I am the nerd that everybody interfaces with to figure out what's going on in their organization and how we can help develop solutions for you. Today, I'll be discussing with you a little bit about what it means to be building a compliant and secure environment in your cloud environment. How many people here have gone through an FDA audit previously? Anybody gone through FDA Part 11 GXP? Okay, great. And how many people are here just to learn about what those things are? So that works out really well for this slide because if a lot of you haven't been through an FDA audit, you haven't heard these terms incessantly like I have. So there are three terms that you're going to deal a lot with when you're going up against the regulatory compliance frameworks, and they're IQ, OQ, and PQ. And these do a great job with also aligning with where your company is at in its growth cycle. So we'll start off with IQ. What is IQ? It's installation qualification, and that is what documentation, processes, and procedures you're putting in place to actually deploy out part of your development lifecycle, part of your pipeline. So in this case, I'll try to use a lab instrument. That's a pretty common thing for everybody to have to deal with. So it's about what does it mean to deploy that lab instrument in your environment and have all of the installation process done, and what it means to protect it from a security perspective, from encryption, from data inception, things like that. So then there's OQ, your operation qualification. That is what really describes how you go about operating and using that device that you've gone through and installed. So this would be more about the documents that are going to reflect what it means to actually get a, let's say you're having some next generation sequencer, you're having a sample come in, you're loading it into that sequencer, and you're having that data output. All of that process that you have, that is wrapped up in your OQ documents. And finally, there's PQ, and PQ is really what the FDA is most going to care about when you're going through these frameworks, and that is what it's really the KPIs against all of the other documents that you've created. So that's how they're going to measure that you've actually been successful in your installation, that you've been successful in your use. That's what the PQ documents are going to help you do. And these, like I said earlier, these really align very well with the phases that your organization is going to be developing in. Your IQ, this is something that you should be worried about at the very beginning, at the seed stage. And I'm talking like friends and family stage of investments. You should be thinking about how you want to go about documenting what it is that you're building. OQ really does a great job at once you maybe have a drug target, you have a therapy that you're chasing after, that's when you want to start thinking about the OQ side of your regulatory frameworks. And then PQ, that's Series A, Series B time frame when you decide that you're going to go into a clinical trial. So just a little bit how those should map up. So at PTP, we really stress that early compliance is paramount to a successful organization. And this isn't just because we want to help, run up some bill about, hey, this stuff is hard. This isn't hard if you do it early. And it's also so important, especially when you start to think about IP protection. So IP protection so often is just treated as it's a document that people slide across the table and say, you're not going to share my ideas with you. Today, in the environment that we're in, your IP is so much about your data, and protecting that data early on in that IQ level, and you'll start to protect your IP at the IQ level of your journey through the frameworks. In that, when you have that lab instrument, it's creating data and it's storing it on a hard drive someplace. You want to make sure that that's encrypted so that a hacker wouldn't be able to go in and steal that data away from you. It also, things like backups. You're protecting your intellectual property through a backup. If you have a ransomware attack, do you want to pay that ransom? Hopefully you don't. You can go back and rely on a backup to get you out there. So early compliance at that IQ level will help in that IP protection side of things. Regulatory preparedness, this maps really well with the OQ side of things. By instilling in your organization as early as you possibly can the idea of IQ, OQ, and PQ, you're really going to be ready for the faster adjustments that you're having to make when you start to go through developing your pipeline. Your pipeline is going to be highly iterative. It's going to be changing on a daily basis, most likely. And by having the framework already adopted and ingrained into the culture of your organization, you're having to make small incremental changes instead of having to do large changes there. And something that we see quite a bit as we work with a lot of VC firms, and so it's IT is usually the people that are spending the most money. So investor confidence isn't always something that people think that we care about, but we often are asked to evaluate different organizations to see who is the strongest investment to make from a technology standpoint. And if you have gone off and have applied that framework to your business as you've been growing it, you're going to be a stronger candidate for an investment. So there are three ways that we see organizations having to go through if obviously early adoption, early implementation is something that we strive for, but there are two other variants that we quite often see that have their benefits and maybe have more of their downfalls. So you can look at having your implementation go for an adopting into a new implementation. You do go through a much faster turnaround. Yes, it will. You could go into an avoid it early, go into a more sandbox environment, highly iterative. But you're going to be facing some hurdles as you go into that adopting into a new framework, and usually that shows up in your in your software architecture when you are having to wrap a shim layer around that software so that it can work in your new framework. So adopting can be a real hindrance into your organization as you're growing. But refactoring is really the scenario that we see the most. It's the active avoidance of having to go and be ready for that regulatory framework can be a high cost. In adopting into that framework, you're having to go off and hire a lot of consultants that are trying to ramp up your organization very quickly to understand what all these terms mean and to get that documentation created. And while still trying to run your day-to-day business. Another big part of it is your security side of things is often delayed, and this happens in adopting and in refactoring. You're running two different security postures. By having that framework, your security framework, as defined early on, you're not having to run two different frameworks. When you're going through adopting or refactoring, you're having to protect your organization in two different manners. It's a very costly and very likely to more likely to be hacked into. So we've had this happen. We thankfully have a customer that's been around for several years, and they've been successful now. But 2.5 years ago, they were having an audit performed in their Germany-based office by an EMA auditor that was just getting a walkthrough, and what they found was that auditor saw on the monitor a sticky note with a password, and that tipped off that auditor to go and dig into that environment a little bit more. It led to finding out that there was no data at rest being encrypted, nothing in flight was being encrypted. All of the instruments that were being rolled out to that laboratory were all being rolled out with the same password. There was no data provenance, and this was a diagnostics company. This was individual medicine being created. So as that diagnostic kit was coming in, there was no way that you could absolutely ensure that data was from that patient. It cost them having to bring in about 4 vendors, PTP to take care of a lot of their technology side, a specific security vendor just to take care of their password policies pretty much, a vendor to help refactor their entire QC side of their organization, and an independent auditor. As you can see here, 35 temporary staff, 25 internal staff, and those 25 internal staff were also expected to be doing their day job during this entire event. 6 months of effort and $12 million, all because of one sticky note hanging on a monitor. Well, and also not adopting into these frameworks earlier. So had they been paying a little attention to that, hopefully they would have been able to avoid that. So
no COO, or their COO was not very good.
Yes. Yeah, we got brought in under their new COO. Excellent. So we'll save questions for the panel, but I really appreciate the time today. Thank you, everybody.